I'm drenched to the bone, standing over my landlord's unconscious body, with his blood pooling around the shattered remains of my grandmother's lamp, when I realize with a strange, disorienting clarity that the sweet old woman I helped in the rain 3 days ago has just saved my life, and the man who's pointing a gun at my attacker while looking at me like I'm either his next victim or something far more dangerous, something he wants to possess, consume, destroy, and rebuild in his own image, is her son. But let me back up, because the thing about disasters is that they never announce themselves with fanfare or warning. They just arrive on ordinary days disguised as mundane moments. And 3 days ago was so unremarkably normal that I almost didn't bring my umbrella when I left for my evening shift at Romano's, the kind of Italian restaurant where the marinara comes from a can, and the owner thinks grabbing your waist when you pass is just being friendly. The sky had been threatening rain all day, that peculiar gray-green color that makes the whole city look like it's holding its breath, waiting for something terrible or wonderful to break the tension. And by the time I was walking home at 11:30 at night with my tips jingling in my apron pocket and my feet screaming in my worn-out sneakers, the first drops were already falling, fat and cold and somehow angry, like the sky itself was furious with the world below. I was 3 blocks from my apartment, and I use that term loosely because it's really just a studio with water damage and a radiator that clangs like it's possessed by the ghost of a very angry mechanic, when the downpour started in earnest, transforming from drops to sheets in seconds. The kind of rain that soaks through your clothes and into your bones and makes you wonder if you'll ever be dry or warm again. That's when I saw her, this elegant older woman standing under the broken awning of a closed bodega, wearing a cream-colored coat that probably cost more than 3 months of my rent, and holding a designer handbag close to her chest, like she was protecting something precious. And even from half a block away I could see that she was stranded, caught without protection in a storm that showed no signs of stopping. My mother, God rest her soul, raised me to believe that kindness was never wasted even when the world tried to convince you otherwise, that small gestures of humanity in a cold city were what separated us from the animals. And even though I was exhausted and soaked, and desperately wanted to get home to my sad little apartment and my sadder little life, I found myself walking toward her with my umbrella extended like an offering, like a bridge between 2 strangers who had no business connecting in this vast, indifferent city. "Please," I said to her, raising my voice over the sound of rain hammering against concrete and metal, the symphony of a city drowning. "Share with me. There's no reason for both of us to catch pneumonia tonight." She looked at me with these warm, dark eyes that reminded me of my grandmother's, full of wisdom and pain, and something else I couldn't quite name, something that felt like recognition even though we'd never met. And when she smiled, it transformed her entire face, made her look younger and softer and infinitely kind, in a way that made my chest tighten with a longing I didn't want to examine too closely. "You're very sweet to offer, darling," she said, and her accent was Italian, cultured and refined, but with an edge of something rougher underneath, like velvet wrapped around steel. "But I couldn't possibly impose on such a young girl. You look exhausted, and I'm sure you have somewhere you need to be." I laughed at that, bitter and tired and more honest than I intended. Because where did I have to be except an apartment where the landlord let himself in whenever he felt like it, and the neighbors pretended not to hear when I asked them to please call someone if they heard me screaming. And before I could stop myself, I was saying, "The only place I need to be is dry, and that's going to happen a lot faster if you stop being polite and get under this umbrella with me." Something shifted in her expression then, a kind of approval, or perhaps assessment, like I'd passed some test I didn't know I was taking. And she stepped close to me, close enough that I could smell her perfume, something expensive and floral with an underlying note of smoke. And together we started walking through streets that had transformed into rivers, our shoulders pressed together under my cheap dollar store umbrella that was never designed to shelter 2 people, but was doing its best anyway. We walked for 15 minutes, maybe more, and she asked me about my life with the kind of genuine interest that made me want to spill everything, all the ugly truths I usually kept locked behind my practiced smile and my "yes, sir," and "right away, ma'am." And I found myself telling her about nursing school and how I'd dropped out when my mother got sick, about the 2 jobs that barely covered rent, about the landlord who'd started making comments about my body and suggesting alternative payment arrangements that made my skin crawl. "Pretty girls like you shouldn't have to suffer alone," she said, and her voice had gone soft and dangerous in a way I didn't understand. Wouldn't understand until 3 days later, when everything I thought I knew about random kindness and chance encounters would be revealed as something far more deliberate, far more calculated. Shouldn't have to fight so hard just to survive in a city that takes and never gives anything back. I walked her to her destination, a black car with tinted windows, and a driver who looked at me with the kind of assessment usually reserved for potential threats. And she touched my cheek with her gloved hand, gentle and maternal, and achingly tender, and said, "Remember, darling, that kindness is never wasted, and sometimes the smallest gestures have the largest consequences. And I will remember you. Svetlana Kozlov, I will remember that you chose to help an old woman when you had every reason to walk past." I didn't ask how she knew my full name when I'd only introduced myself as Lana. Didn't question the way her driver watched me until I turned the corner. Didn't think too hard about why this elegant woman with her expensive coat and her knowing eyes had been standing in the rain without protection in my neighborhood, of all the neighborhoods in this sprawling city. I just went home, changed into dry clothes, ate cold leftover pasta standing over my sink, and fell into bed thinking that maybe, just maybe, there were still good people in the world, still moments of genuine connection in the chaos. I was so fucking naive. 3 days later, which is to say, tonight, right now, this moment that I'm living through with Victor's blood under my fingernails and my heart trying to break through my ribcage, I understood that there are no random encounters, no chance meetings, that everything in this city is connected by invisible threads of power and violence and debt, and I had somehow stumbled into a web I didn't even know existed. Victor had let himself into my apartment around 10 o'clock, drunk enough that I could smell the vodka from across the room, but sober enough to lock the door behind him. And when he started talking about the rent I owed and the various ways I could work it off, his words slurring but his intentions crystal clear, I felt something inside me snap like a wire pulled too tight for too long. I'd spent 26 years being polite, being accommodating, being the kind of girl who smiled through discomfort and apologized for taking up space, who made herself smaller so men like Victor could feel bigger. And in that moment, with his hands reaching for me and his breath hot and sour on my face, I decided I was done shrinking, done apologizing, done being prey in a world full of predators. The lamp was heavy in my hands, heavier than I expected, and when I brought it down on his head with every ounce of strength I possessed, the sound it made was wet and crunching and sickeningly final, and he dropped like a puppet with cut strings, hitting the floor with a thud that shook my entire studio apartment. I stood there, breathing hard, my hands shaking, waiting to feel horror or regret or fear. But all I felt was a savage, primal satisfaction, a sense that for the first time in my life I had taken control of my own narrative instead of letting someone else write it for me. And that feeling was intoxicating and terrifying in equal measure. That's when my door exploded inward, not opened, not unlocked, but literally kicked in with enough force to splinter the frame. And suddenly my tiny apartment was filled with men, big men in expensive suits, who moved with the kind of coordinated precision that spoke of military training or something darker, and I realized with a clarity that felt like ice water in my veins that I had made a terrible, terrible miscalculation. And then he walked in, and I understood immediately that he was different from the others, that he was the center of gravity around which everything else orbited, that he was the kind of man who could make you forget how to breathe just by looking at you. Alessio Marchetti was beautiful in the way that predators are beautiful, all clean lines and controlled power, wearing a 3-piece suit that probably cost more than my yearly salary, and carrying a gun like it was an extension of his hand. And when his eyes met mine, gray like storm clouds, like steel, like the color of the sky before everything goes to hell, I felt something shift in my chest, something dangerous and irreversible. He looked at me, really looked at me, taking in my wild hair and my torn shirt and my bloody hands, then down at Victor's prone form on my floor, and then back to me with an expression I couldn't read, something between amusement and assessment, and a hunger that made my stomach drop and my pulse race. "Mama said you had kind eyes," he said, and his voice was like smoke and whiskey, rough and smooth at the same time, with that same Italian accent his mother had but darker, more threatening. "She didn't mention you were a fighter, didn't tell me that you had violence in you waiting to break free." I opened my mouth to respond, to explain, to defend myself. But no words came because what could I possibly say that would make sense of this situation? That would explain why the son of the woman I'd helped was standing in my apartment looking at me like I was a puzzle he couldn't wait to solve or a problem he needed to eliminate. He moved closer, stepping over Victor's body like it was nothing more than an inconvenience, and I could smell his cologne now, expensive and dark and masculine in a way that made my knees weak even though I was terrified, even though every instinct I had was screaming at me to run. And when he reached out to touch my face, I flinched but didn't pull away, couldn't pull away, because his touch was surprisingly gentle, his thumb brushing across my cheekbone with a tenderness that didn't match the gun in his other hand. "Clean this up," he said without looking away from me, addressing the men behind him who immediately moved into action with the kind of efficiency that suggested they'd done this before, many times before. "Bring the girl, and make sure she's unharmed. Make sure not a single hair on her head is disturbed, because she's important now. She's under my protection whether she knows it or not." And that's when I understood, with a dizzying rush of realization that made the room spin around me, that the old woman in the rain hadn't been a random encounter at all, that I had been chosen, selected, pulled into something so much bigger and darker than I could have possibly imagined. And the man standing in front of me looking at me like I was both salvation and damnation wasn't my rescuer. He was my future, my fate, my ruin. And the terrifying part was that some dark, hidden part of me that had just discovered it could kill was already reaching toward him like a flower reaching for the sun, already craving the darkness I could see swirling in his storm cloud eyes, already knowing that whatever happened next would change me in ways I couldn't begin to comprehend, couldn't possibly prepare for, couldn't hope to survive intact. I should be terrified, should be screaming or crying or begging for mercy as these men in their expensive suits guide me, not roughly, but firmly, with hands that know exactly how much pressure to apply to make compliance the only logical option, out of my apartment building and into a black SUV with tinted windows so dark that the world outside disappears entirely. But instead, I find myself cataloging every detail with a strange, detached clarity, noticing how the leather seats smell new and expensive, how the man sitting beside me keeps his hand near his waistband where I can see the outline of a gun, how Alessio Marchetti sits in the front passenger seat with his phone pressed to his ear, speaking rapid Italian that sounds like music and menace in equal measure. The drive takes 40 minutes, winding through neighborhoods that get progressively cleaner and wealthier until we're pulling through iron gates that probably cost more than everything I've ever owned combined, past manicured gardens that look like they belong in a magazine spread about old money and older secrets, and finally stopping in front of a mansion that makes me understand, with a sinking feeling in my stomach, that I have stumbled into a world so far removed from my own that I might as well have fallen through a portal into another dimension entirely. They bring me inside through a side entrance, not the grand front doors with their ornate carvings and their implicit promise of power, and I'm escorted down hallways lined with artwork that I'm fairly certain is real, actual paintings by actual famous artists, whose names I half remember from the one art history class I took before dropping out, until we reach a sitting room that manages to be both opulent and somehow warm, filled with antiques and fresh flowers and the kind of furniture that looks like it's been in the family for generations. And there she is, sitting in a high-backed chair like it's a throne, wearing a different outfit than the one I'd seen her in 3 days ago, but looking exactly the same, elegant and refined, and somehow dangerous in a way I hadn't noticed when we were huddled together under my cheap umbrella. And Valentina Marchetti smiles at me like we're old friends meeting for afternoon tea instead of a victim and her orchestrator meeting in the aftermath of violence. "Svetlana, darling," she says, and her voice is warm honey over sharp glass, sweet and cutting at the same time. "Please sit down. You look absolutely exhausted, and I imagine this has all been quite overwhelming for you, though I must say you handled yourself remarkably well from what Alessio tells me." I want to refuse, want to demand answers, want to scream at her that whatever game she's playing I didn't consent to being a piece on her board, but my legs are shaking, and my adrenaline is crashing, and I find myself sinking into the chair across from her, accepting the cup of tea that appears in my hands courtesy of a silent servant who materializes and disappears like a ghost. "You set me up," I say, and my voice sounds hollow even to my own ears, drained of the anger I want to feel but can't quite access through the exhaustion and shock. "You weren't stranded in the rain by accident. You were there waiting for me, testing me. And I don't understand why. Don't understand what you could possibly want from someone like me." Valentina's smile doesn't falter, doesn't even flicker, and she sets down her own teacup with a delicate click that sounds unnaturally loud in the quiet room. And when she speaks, her voice carries the weight of absolute certainty, the kind of conviction that comes from decades of getting exactly what she wants through methods I'm only beginning to imagine. "You're right, of course," she says, and there's no apology in her tone, no shame or regret, just simple acknowledgement of facts. "I was there specifically to meet you, to see if you were the kind of girl who would help a stranger, or walk past pretending not to notice. To test whether you had the kindness and the strength that I suspected you possessed. And I'm pleased to say you exceeded my expectations in every way." I stare at her, trying to process this admission, trying to understand how my simple act of sharing an umbrella has led me here, to this mansion, to this woman who orchestrated our meeting with the casual confidence of someone who moves human beings around like chess pieces. And before I can formulate a response, before I can ask any of the 1,000 questions crowding my mind, the door opens and Alessio walks in, and the entire atmosphere of the room shifts, becomes charged with something electric and dangerous. He's changed his clothes, I notice with the same strange detachment that's been protecting me from the full horror of this situation, traded the blood-splattered suit for fresh one in charcoal gray that fits him like it was made specifically for his body, which it probably was. And when he looks at me with those storm cloud eyes, I feel something low in my belly tighten and heat, which is insane, which is completely inappropriate given that this man and his mother have upended my entire life in the space of an evening. "Victor is alive," he says, addressing his mother but keeping his eyes on me, and I can't tell if that's good news or bad news from his tone, which remains carefully neutral, carefully controlled, concussed, angry, and already making calls to his Bratva connections, which means we have perhaps 12 hours before Dmitry Volkov learns that his nephew was attacked by a girl under my mother's protection. The words hit me like physical blows, each revelation worse than the last, because of course my landlord wasn't just a creep with boundary issues. He was connected. He was part of something larger and more dangerous, and I had cracked his skull open without understanding the consequences, without knowing that I was starting something that couldn't be stopped. "The Bratva," I repeat, and my voice sounds very far away, like it's coming from someone else's mouth. "Your nephew, you're saying that Victor is Russian mafia, that I attacked someone who's part of an organization that will want revenge, will want blood for blood." Alessio moves closer, and I'm acutely aware of how he takes up space, how his presence seems to fill the entire room and press against my skin like a physical force. And when he crouches down in front of my chair, putting himself at eye level with me in a gesture that might seem deferential, if not for the predatory grace in every line of his body, I stop breathing entirely. "What I'm saying," he tells me, and his voice is low and intimate, and somehow more terrifying than if he were yelling, "Is that you killed a man tonight? Or tried to? The distinction won't matter much to the people looking for you. And now you have a choice to make. A decision that will determine whether you live or die. Whether you disappear into witness protection and spend the rest of your life looking over your shoulder, or whether you accept my protection and everything that comes with it." I want to laugh at the absurdity of it, at the idea that I have any real choice when the alternative he's presenting is death or a lifetime of hiding. But the sound that comes out of my throat is more like a sob, ragged and raw and full of the terror I've been holding back since those men kicked down my door. "What exactly does your protection entail?" I ask, because I need to understand the terms of this devil's bargain before I agree to anything. Need to know what I'm trading my freedom for, even though we both know I'm going to accept, because the alternative is unthinkable. "What do you want from me in exchange for keeping me alive?" Something flashes in his eyes, something hot and possessive that makes my pulse spike and my skin flush. And I realize with a jolt that whatever he wants from me, it's not simple, it's not clean, it's something complicated and dangerous and infinitely more binding than just physical protection. "You'll live here," he says, and each word is deliberate, carefully chosen, laden with meaning I'm not quite sophisticated enough to fully decode. "In my home, under my roof, where I can ensure your safety every hour of every day, and you'll work at my club, Inferno, as cover, as a legitimate reason for you to be in my life in case anyone asks questions. And in exchange," I press, because there has to be more, there's always more. Men like Alessio Marchetti don't offer protection out of the goodness of their hearts. "What do I owe you? What's the price for this arrangement?" Valentina makes a soft sound, something between amusement and approval. And when I glance at her, she's watching us with the expression of someone observing a particularly entertaining performance, like she knows exactly how this conversation will end, and is enjoying watching it unfold according to her design. "Loyalty," Alessio says simply. But the word carries weight, carries implications that make my heart race faster. "You don't question my business? You don't leave the estate without guards assigned to protect you. You don't speak to anyone about what you see or hear in this house. And most importantly, you don't betray me because betrayal in my world has consequences that you can't begin to imagine." I should say no, should tell him that I'd rather take my chances on my own than sell myself into what amounts to beautiful captivity. But the memory of Victor's hands reaching for me, of his breath on my face, of the way I'd been powerless and afraid in my own home, makes the decision easier than it should be. "And if I follow your rules?" I hear myself asking, my voice steadier than I feel. "If I'm loyal and obedient and everything you're asking me to be, what happens then? What do I get besides survival?" He smiles at that, a slow, dangerous curve of his mouth that transforms his face from coldly beautiful to devastatingly attractive. And when he reaches out to touch my face, his fingers tracing the line of my jaw with a gentleness that seems at odds with everything I know about him, I don't pull away, even though every survival instinct I have is telling me to run. "What you get, Lana," he says, using the shortened version of my name for the first time, making it sound like an endearment and a claim all at once, "is power, is the ability to walk through this city without fear, is the knowledge that anyone who tries to hurt you will answer to me, and trust me when I tell you that answering to me is not something people do twice." The promise in his words, the dark seduction of safety purchased through violence, should repel me, should make me recoil from this man and his world of blood and bullets and moral ambiguity. But instead I find myself leaning into his touch, find myself craving the protection he's offering even though I know it comes with chains attached, invisible but unbreakable. "I accept," I whisper, and the words feel like a vow, like a contract signed in something more binding than ink. "I'll stay, I'll follow your rules, I'll be whatever you need me to be." His eyes flash with something triumphant and hungry, and before I can process what's happening, he's standing and pulling me to my feet with him, one hand wrapped around my wrist in a grip that's firm, but not painful, proprietary, but not quite threatening. "Then you're mine now," he says. and the possessive pronoun sends a shiver down my spine that's equal parts fear and anticipation. Mine to protect, mine to keep, mine to train in the ways of this world until you're strong enough to survive it without me, though I have no intention of ever letting you try. Valentina claps her hands together once, a sharp sound that breaks the tension stretched taut between her son and me. And when she speaks, her voice is filled with satisfaction that makes me wonder again just how much of this she planned, how far back her machinations extend. Wonderful, she says brightly, as if we've just agreed to something as simple as dinner plans instead of a binding arrangement that will change the trajectory of my entire life. Alessio will show you to your room, and tomorrow we'll begin your education properly, teach you everything you need to know about the family business and your place in it. I let Alessio lead me from the room, too overwhelmed to protest or question, and we walk through more hallways, climb a grand staircase that probably cost more than my entire apartment building, until we reach a door that he opens to reveal a bedroom that's bigger than my entire former living space, decorated in shades of cream and gold that should be gaudy but somehow aren't, with a massive bed that looks like it belongs in a luxury hotel, and windows that overlook gardens illuminated by subtle lighting. "This is yours," he tells me, and his hand is still on my wrist, his thumb pressed against my pulse point, where I'm sure he can feel my heart racing. "Everything you need is already here, clothes in your size, toiletries, anything you might want, and my room is right next door if you need anything during the night, if you get scared or change your mind about our arrangement." The implication that I might seek him out, might go to him in the darkness, makes my breath catch, and I force myself to look at him directly, to meet those gray eyes that seem to see straight through all my defenses, to the frightened, exhilarated, dangerously intrigued girl beneath. "I won't change my mind," I say, and I mean it, even though I'm not entirely sure what I've agreed to beyond the surface terms, even though I suspect that being under Alessio Marchetti's protection means being owned by him in ways I haven't begun to understand. I made my choice, and I'll live with it, whatever it costs me. He studies my face for a long moment, his expression unreadable, and then he does something unexpected, something that makes my stomach flip and my skin heat. He raises my wrist to his mouth and presses a kiss to my pulse point, his lips warm and soft against my skin, the gesture somehow more intimate than anything else that's happened tonight. "Good girl," he murmurs against my skin, and the praise shouldn't affect me the way it does, shouldn't send warmth flooding through my body, or make me want to earn more of his approval. "Get some rest, Lana, because tomorrow your real education begins, and I promise you it won't be gentle." He releases my wrist and steps back, and I feel the loss of his touch like a physical ache, which is insane, which is my trauma and exhaustion and fear manifesting in completely inappropriate ways, and I force myself to walk into the room, to close the door between us, even though part of me wants to call him back, wants to ask him to stay, wants to not be alone with my thoughts and the crushing weight of everything that's happened. I lean against the closed door and slide down until I'm sitting on the plush carpet, my knees pulled to my chest, and I let myself feel it all. The terror, the relief, the strange exhilaration, the creeping realization that I've just sold myself to a man I don't know, a man who could destroy me without even trying, a man whose mother orchestrated our meeting because she saw something in me that I didn't know I possessed. And the worst part, the truly terrifying part that I can barely admit even to myself, is that some dark, hidden part of me that woke up when I brought that lamp down on Victor's head is whispering that this is what I've been waiting for. That Alessio Marchetti and his world of violence and power and absolute certainty is exactly what I need. That maybe I was always meant to be found, claimed, transformed into something more dangerous than the scared waitress who shared her umbrella with a stranger. I fall asleep on the floor like that, still in my blood-stained clothes, too exhausted to even make it to the bed, and I dream of storm cloud eyes and gentle touches, and a voice promising me that I'll never have to be afraid again, as long as I belong to him, as long as I surrender everything I am to become what he needs me to be. When I wake up, wrapped in a blanket I don't remember getting, with dawn light streaming through windows I didn't close. I find a single white card on the floor beside me, and written in elegant script are just 3 words and a phone number that I somehow know will connect me directly to him. Your monster. Call anytime. And beneath it, in smaller letters that make my heart stop and then race double time, the Volkovs know your name. They're coming for you, and you have until tonight to decide if you trust me enough to let me make this right. Because after tonight, the choice won't be yours anymore. I press the call button on the phone at 3 a.m, my fingers trembling not from fear, but from something darker and more complicated. Something that feels like surrender and defiance tangled together in a knot I can't begin to unravel. And he answers on the first ring like he's been waiting. Like he knew I would break before dawn. Like everything about me is already predictable to him in ways that should terrify me but instead make me feel seen for the first time in my life. Say it, Alessio commands, and his voice is rough with what might be sleep or might be something else entirely, something heated and hungry that makes my skin prickle with awareness, even though he's not in the room with me, even though we're connected only by this phone that feels like a lifeline and a leash all at once. The words I should say are I accept, are I'll do whatever you want, are some version of compliance and submission that would make this easier for both of us. But what comes out of my mouth instead is raw and honest and probably stupid given the circumstances. Come get me. I can't stay in this room anymore. I can't be alone with my thoughts. And I need you to tell me that this isn't insane, that agreeing to belong to a man I don't know because his mother orchestrated our meeting isn't the most reckless thing I've ever done. There's a pause. A moment of silence that stretches so long I think maybe he's hung up. Maybe I've said the wrong thing and revealed too much vulnerability. But then I hear movement on his end, hear the rustle of fabric and the sound of a door opening, and his voice comes back darker and more intense than before. Don't move, he tells me. And it's not a request, but an order. The kind of command that expects immediate obedience. Stay exactly where you are, Lana, and I'll be there in 30 seconds, and then we're going to have a conversation about what it means to be mine. About what happens when you call me in the middle of the night and ask me to come to you. He hangs up before I can respond, and I'm left holding the phone and trying to control my breathing, trying to calm my racing heart, trying to understand why the promise in his words makes me feel safer and more endangered than I've ever felt in my life, why the thought of him coming to me makes my stomach flutter and my thighs clench with an anticipation that has nothing to do with fear and everything to do with want. True to his word, he arrives in what feels like seconds, not bothering to knock but simply opening the door that connects our rooms, a door I hadn't even noticed earlier, hadn't realized existed until now, and stepping into my space wearing nothing but black silk pajama pants that hang low on his hips and reveal a torso that looks like it was carved from marble by an artist who understood exactly how devastating the male form could be. I'm still on the floor where I fell asleep, still wrapped in the blanket that somehow appeared while I was unconscious. And when he looks down at me with those storm cloud eyes that seem to catalog every detail of my appearance, every sign of my distress and exhaustion and barely contained panic, I feel simultaneously exposed and protected, vulnerable and powerful. You didn't even make it to the bed, he observes, and there's something in his tone that might be concern or might be approval. You fell asleep on the floor in your bloody clothes like a soldier after battle, and some part of me finds that incredibly telling about who you really are beneath the waitress uniform and the polite smiles. He moves, closer, and then lowers himself to the floor beside me, mirroring my position with his back against the wall and his long legs stretched out in front of him. And the casual intimacy of the gesture, the way he's willing to sit on the ground with me instead of demanding I come to him, makes something in my chest tighten and warm. Tell me what you're thinking, he says, and it's still a command but softer now, gentler, like he's genuinely interested in the answer, and not just asking out of obligation. Tell me what's going through your mind at 3 a.m. that made you call me instead of trying to run, instead of climbing out that window and disappearing into the night. I could lie, could give him some sanitized version of my thoughts that doesn't reveal how confused and conflicted and dangerously attracted I am to him and this life he's offering. But something about the darkness and the intimacy of this moment makes honesty feel like the only option. Like anything less would be an insult to both of us. I'm thinking that I should be more afraid than I am, I admit, my voice barely above a whisper. I'm thinking that a normal person would be planning their escape, or negotiating better terms, or at least crying about how their life has completely fallen apart. But instead I'm sitting here wondering what it would feel like to surrender completely. To stop fighting and just let you remake me into whatever you need me to be. His sharp intake of breath tells me that my honesty has affected him, has pierced through whatever careful control he maintains. And when I risk a glance at his face, I see something raw and hungry there. Something that makes me understand that whatever this is between us, it's not one-sided. I'm not alone in feeling this dangerous pull towards something that should be wrong, but feels inevitably right. You want to know what surrender looks like, he says, and his voice has dropped to that low, intimate register that seems to bypass my brain and go straight to my body, making my skin flush and my breath catch. You want me to show you what it means to be mine, to belong to me in ways that go beyond just protection and into something darker and more binding. It's not really a question, but I nod anyway, unable to form words, unable to do anything but acknowledge the truth of what he's saying. The truth of what I want, even though I barely understand it myself. Even though every rational part of my mind is screaming that this is too fast, too intense, too dangerous. He shifts his position then, moving with that predatory grace that makes my pulse spike. And suddenly he's kneeling in front of me, one hand coming up to cup my face with a gentleness that seems at odds with everything I know about him, his thumb brushing across my lower lip in a gesture that's both tender and possessive. If you surrender to me, he says, and each word is deliberate and weighted with meaning. If you give yourself over completely, then you need to understand that I take care of what's mine, that I protect it and nurture it and make it stronger, but I also control it, shape it, demand absolute loyalty and obedience in exchange for everything I provide. My breath is coming fast now, shallow and quick, and I can feel my heart hammering against my ribs like it's trying to escape my chest. But I don't pull away from his touch. Don't break eye contact, even though the intensity of his gaze makes me want to look anywhere else. Show me, I whisper, and the words feel like crossing a threshold, like stepping off a cliff with no idea if there's water below or rocks. Show me what it means to be yours, because I'm tired of being afraid, tired of being powerless, tired of existing in a world that takes and never gives anything back. Something shifts in his expression, something triumphant and dark and infinitely possessive. And then his mouth is on mine, and I'm learning that kissing Alessio Marchetti is like drowning and breathing for the first time simultaneously. That his lips are softer than I expected, but his grip on my face is iron. That he kisses like he does everything else, with absolute control and devastating thoroughness. He kisses me until I'm dizzy, until I've forgotten how to think about anything except the taste of him and the feel of his hands moving from my face to my hair, tangling in the strands and tilting my head back to give him better access, deeper access, the kind of access that makes it clear he's claiming me with this kiss, marking me as his in ways that have nothing to do with violence and everything to do with a different kind of possession. When he finally pulls back, we're both breathing hard, and I can see the hunger in his eyes, the desire that he's keeping carefully leashed, but that's there nonetheless, simmering just below the surface of his control. That's the beginning, he tells me, his voice rough and strained. That's what it feels like to surrender, to let me have you, to trust that I'll take what I want but give you what you need in return, and if you can handle that, if you can accept that level of intensity and possession, then we can move forward with this arrangement. I should be overwhelmed, should be pulling back and demanding space to think. But instead I find myself leaning toward him, craving more of his touch, more of that devastating certainty that makes me feel like I don't have to carry the weight of my decisions alone anymore. What happens now? I ask, because I need to understand the practical reality of this arrangement, beyond the heated promises and the intoxicating kisses? What do we do about the Volkovs, about Victor and his uncle who wants revenge, about the fact that I'm apparently caught in the middle of a war I didn't even know existed until tonight? Alessio's expression hardens, shifts from heated to cold in a heartbeat, and I'm reminded that this man is dangerous, that the gentleness he shows me is a choice he makes, rather than his natural state, that underneath the expensive clothes and the careful control, there's a predator who's killed and will kill again, without hesitation. What happens now, he says, standing and pulling me to my feet with him in one smooth motion, is that you get cleaned up, change into something that isn't covered in blood, and then we're going for a drive, because the Volkovs made their move faster than I anticipated. And if we don't handle this tonight, if we don't show them that you're under my protection and that touching you means declaring war on my family, then this ends badly for everyone involved. The shift from intimate to operational is jarring, but I follow his lead, letting him guide me toward the bathroom attached to my room, and when he starts to leave to give me privacy, I find myself reaching out, catching his wrist, holding him there with a grip that's probably too tight, but I can't seem to loosen. Don't leave, I say, hating how vulnerable I sound but unable to keep the plea out of my voice. I know that's probably not how this works. I know I'm supposed to be strong and independent and not clingy, but I can't be alone right now. I can't handle being by myself with my thoughts, and I need you to stay even if you just stand outside the shower and don't look at me. His expression softens fractionally, and he reaches up with his free hand to touch my face again. That gesture that's becoming familiar, that makes me feel grounded and safe in ways I can't explain. I'm not going anywhere, he promises, and I can hear the truth in his words, can feel the certainty in his touch. Take your shower, wash off the evidence of your violence and your fear, and when you come out, I'll still be here. I'll always be here now that you've called me, now that you've asked me to come get you. I shower quickly, efficiently, washing away the dried blood and the sweat, and the feeling of Victor's hands on me, scrubbing my skin until it's pink and raw, until I feel clean for the first time since this nightmare started. And true to his word, when I emerge wrapped in one of the plush towels I find hanging in the bathroom, Alessio is sitting on the edge of the massive bed, scrolling through his phone with a slight frown that clears the moment he sees me. There are clothes in the closet, he says, gesturing toward a door I hadn't explored yet. Everything should fit. My mother is very thorough when she decides to adopt someone into the family, and you should dress practically because where we're going tonight isn't a social call, it's a demonstration of power. I find jeans that fit perfectly, a black long-sleeved shirt that's soft and expensive feeling, boots that are broken in enough to be comfortable but sturdy enough for whatever he has planned. And when I emerge fully dressed, I feel more like myself than I have since those men broke down my door. Feel like maybe I can handle whatever comes next as long as he's beside me. Where exactly are we going? I ask as he leads me back through the house. Down hallways I'm starting to recognize. Past rooms where I can hear the subtle sounds of other people waking despite the early hour. The sense that this house never really sleeps. That there's always someone watching. Always someone ready to act. We're going to meet Dmitry Volkov, Alessio says, and his voice is carefully neutral, carefully controlled. We're going to walk into his territory, into his club where he holds court like a king, and we're going to make it very clear that you belong to me now, that touching you means going to war with the Marchetti family, and that he needs to accept his nephew's failure and move on before this escalates into something that costs both our families more than either of us wants to pay. The casual way he discusses walking into enemy territory makes my stomach clench with fear. But there's also something exhilarating about it, something that makes me feel alive and powerful in ways I've never experienced, like I'm finally stepping into a version of myself that's been waiting dormant for years. We take a different car this time, something lower and faster with an engine that purrs like a contented predator. And Alessio drives with the same controlled precision he applies to everything else, navigating the pre-dawn streets with the confidence of someone who owns this city, who knows every shortcut and back alley, who moves through the darkness like he was born to it. I need you to understand something, he says as we get closer to our destination, and there's an urgency in his voice that makes me pay attention, makes me focus on his words instead of my racing thoughts. What happens in this meeting? The things I might say or do, they're all part of the performance, part of establishing dominance and protecting you, and you need to trust me even if it seems like I'm being cruel or cold, even if I say things that hurt you, because everything I do tonight is designed to keep you alive. I want to ask what he means, want to demand details and explanations, but we're pulling up to a building that looks like an ordinary warehouse from the outside, but has subtle signs of security everywhere. Cameras, guards trying to look casual, reinforced doors, and I realize with a jolt of adrenaline that we're here, that whatever happens next will determine whether I live or die, whether I become part of Alessio's world or become a casualty of it. He comes around to my side of the car and opens the door for me, offering his hand in a gesture that looks gentlemanly but I know is also strategic, a way of establishing physical connection, of showing anyone watching that I'm with him, that I'm his, and when I take his hand I feel the strength in his grip, the promise that he won't let me fall. Stay close to me, he murmurs as we approach the entrance, as guards recognize him and step aside with expressions that mix fear and respect. Don't speak unless I tell you to. Don't show fear even if you're terrified. And remember that every second we're in there, you're playing a role. You're the girl who belongs to Alessio Marchetti, and that means you're untouchable, protected, mine. The possessive pronoun sends a shiver down my spine, and I straighten my shoulders, lift my chin, and follow him into the lion's den with the terrifying understanding that after tonight, there's no going back, no returning to the girl I was before I shared my umbrella with a stranger, no pretending that I'm anything other than exactly what Alessio is making me. His weapon, his weakness, his perfectly orchestrated downfall wrapped in the body of a waitress who didn't know she had violence sleeping in her bones until someone finally gave her permission to wake it up. We walk through dim hallways that smell like cigarette smoke and expensive cologne, past rooms where I can hear music and voices, past men who look at me with expressions ranging from curiosity to calculation, until we reach a door that opens into what can only be described as a throne room, opulent and excessive, where a man who can only be Dmitry Volkov sits surrounded by his soldiers, and when his eyes land on me, they're cold and assessing and hungry in a way that makes my skin crawl. "Marchetti," he says, and his voice is heavily accented, thick with Russia and violence. "You bring me the girl who cracked my nephew's skull. You deliver her to me like a gift, and I'm supposed to believe this is anything other than you trying to avoid a war you know you cannot win." Alessio's hand tightens on mine, just for a second. A brief squeeze that feels like reassurance or warning or both, and then he's stepping forward, pulling me with him, presenting me not as a peace offering, but as a declaration. And when he speaks, his voice is ice and authority. "I bring you nothing, Dmitri," he says, and every word is sharp and cutting, "except the courtesy of explaining in person that the girl belongs to me now, that she's under my family's protection, and that any attempt to harm her will be considered an act of war against the Marchetti organization. And we both know how that ends." Dmitri's eyes narrow, and the tension in the room ratchets up until it feels like the air itself might shatter. And I understand with dawning horror that I'm standing at the epicenter of something that could explode into violence at any moment, that my simple act of self-defense has somehow become the spark that might ignite a war between two criminal empires. And the only thing standing between me and death is the man whose hand I'm holding, the man who's claimed me as his with the casual certainty of someone who's never been told no, who's never had to compromise or negotiate, who takes what he wants and dares the world to try to stop him. "Then we have a problem?" Dmitri says, leaning forward with a smile that promises pain and suffering. "Because my nephew is family, and in my world family, debts are paid in blood, and I will have satisfaction for what this little whore did to him, either by taking her life or by taking something you value equally. And I'm very curious to see which you choose when I force you to make that decision." The moment Dmitri calls me a whore, Something inside me snaps cleanly in half like a bone breaking, and I feel the rage that I've been swallowing and suppressing and pushing down for 26 years rise up in my throat like bile, hot and bitter and demanding release. And before Alessio can respond, before he can say whatever carefully calculated thing he was planning to diffuse this situation, I'm stepping forward out of his protective grip and speaking with a voice that doesn't sound like mine at all, that sounds like it belongs to someone harder and colder and infinitely more dangerous than the waitress who shared her umbrella with a stranger just days ago. Your nephew was a predator who broke into my apartment drunk and violent, who put his hands on me without permission, who made it very clear that he intended to rape me as payment for rent I couldn't afford. And if defending myself from assault makes me a whore in your eyes, then I'm curious what that makes him in the eyes of the men who follow you, whether they're comfortable serving someone who retaliates against women for refusing to be victimized. The silence that follows my words is absolute and terrifying, the kind of quiet that feels like the world is holding its breath before something catastrophic happens. And I can feel Alessio's shock radiating from him in waves, even though he doesn't move, doesn't speak, doesn't do anything to undermine the challenge I've just issued to one of the most dangerous men in the city. Dimitri's face goes through a series of expressions: surprise, fury, calculation, and I watch him process what I've said. Watch him understand that I've just reframed the entire narrative from girl attacks innocent man to girl defends herself from rapist. And I can see the moment he realizes that his soldiers are watching, that they're hearing me accuse his nephew of attempted sexual assault, that their loyalty might waver if they think he's going to war to avenge a predator. You have proof of these accusations, Dimitri says finally, and his voice is carefully controlled, but I can hear the anger underneath, can sense that I've backed him into a corner he didn't expect. You have witnesses or evidence that my nephew attempted what you claim? Or are these just convenient lies designed to save your worthless life? Alessio moves then, pulling out his phone with deliberate slowness, and when he speaks, his voice carries an edge of satisfaction that tells me he was prepared for this, that he knew this moment would come and planned accordingly. Victor has been under surveillance for 6 months, Alessio says, and each word lands like a hammer blow. Because we suspected he was skimming from the protection money he collected for your organization, and in the course of that surveillance, we documented 14 separate occasions where he used his position to coerce sexual favors from women who owed rent, who were vulnerable, who had no one to protect them from his abuse. He swipes through his phone and then turns it to show Dimitri something that makes the older man's face go rigid with fury. And I realize with a dizzying rush of understanding that this was Valentina's plan all along, that she chose me specifically because I was one of Victor's victims, that she orchestrated our meeting knowing that my kindness combined with her son's protection would give them leverage against the Volkovs, would allow them to turn a potential war into an opportunity to weaken their enemies. Your nephew wasn't just a predator, Alessio continues, his voice cold and clinical. He was also a thief who stole from you, who betrayed your trust while using your name to terrorize innocent women. And the evidence we've compiled is extensive enough that if we chose to share it with your organization, with the other Bratva families who value honor and loyalty, your nephew's reputation would be destroyed posthumously, and your own standing would be questioned for allowing such behavior to continue under your protection. I watch Dimitri's soldiers exchange glances, watch the calculation in their eyes as they process this information, and I understand that Alessio has just given them permission to abandon their loyalty to Victor, has reframed my violence as justified retribution rather than unprovoked attack. So here's what's going to happen, Alessio says, and his voice carries absolute authority now, the kind of command that expects obedience. You're going to accept that Victor's death, because let's be honest, he's not going to survive the injuries Lana gave him, the internal bleeding is too severe, was the natural consequence of his own actions, his own betrayal of everything your organization supposedly stands for, and in exchange, we keep the evidence of his crimes private. We don't embarrass you publicly, and we continue our business relationship as if this unfortunate incident never occurred. Dimitri is trapped, and he knows it. Caught between pride and pragmatism, between the desire for revenge and the reality that going to war over someone who was not only a predator, but also a thief, would make him look weak and foolish to his own people. And I watch him struggle with the decision. Watch him weigh his options while the room holds its breath. "And the girl," Dimitri says finally, his eyes fixed on me with an intensity that makes my skin crawl. "What happens to her in this arrangement? Does she walk away free after killing my blood? Does she get to live her life like nothing happened?" Alessio's hand finds mine again, his grip possessive and protective. And when he speaks, there's something in his voice that makes my heart race, and my stomach flutter with an emotion I'm not ready to name. "The girl belongs to me now," he says, and the possessive pronoun carries weight and promise and threat all at once. "She's under my protection, she's part of my family, and anyone who touches her, anyone who even thinks about harming her, will answer to me personally. And I promise you that my methods of retribution make your worst impulses look merciful in comparison." There's a long moment where Dimitri studies us both, where I can practically see him calculating angles and probabilities, and then he leans back in his chair with a smile that doesn't reach his eyes, and nods once. A sharp, decisive movement that feels like a door closing on one chapter and opening onto another. "Fine," he says, and his voice is flat and emotionless. "We call this debt settled. We acknowledge that Victor brought his fate upon himself through his own actions. But understand this, Marchetti. I'm accepting your terms not because I fear you, but because I'm a businessman who recognizes when continued conflict costs more than it gains. And if you ever give me cause to reconsider this decision, if your little pet ever crosses my path again, I will not be so generous." Alessio doesn't respond with words, just gives Dimitri a look that promises violence and protection in equal measure. And then he's guiding me back through the hallways we came from, past the guards and the doors, and the rooms full of men who now know that I'm untouchable, that I'm protected by someone powerful enough to make the Volkovs back down. We don't speak until we're back in the car, until we're pulling away from that building and heading back toward the estate. And then Alessio makes a sound that might be laughter, or might be relief. And when he looks at me, there's something in his eyes that's equal parts pride and possession, and something warmer that I'm afraid to acknowledge. "You were magnificent," he says, and his voice is rough with emotion I didn't know he was capable of feeling. "You stood in front of one of the most dangerous men in this city, and called him out, challenged him, backed him into a corner with nothing but your words and your courage, and watching you transform from scared girl to warrior goddess was the most beautiful thing I've ever seen." His praise shouldn't affect me the way it does, shouldn't make me feel powerful and desired and infinitely capable. But it does. And I realize with startling clarity that this is what I've been missing my entire life. Someone who sees my strength instead of my vulnerability, who celebrates my violence instead of condemning it, who looks at me like I'm something precious and dangerous and worth protecting at any cost. When we get back to the estate, Valentina is waiting in the foyer with an expression of supreme satisfaction. And when she opens her arms, I find myself walking into her embrace like a daughter coming home to her mother. And she holds me tight and whispers in my ear that I've done exactly what she hoped I would do. That I've proven myself worthy of her son and his protection. That I've become part of the family in ways that go beyond simple arrangement or convenience. And later, when Alessio walks me back to my room and pauses at the threshold, when he cups my face in his hands and kisses me with a tenderness that steals my breath and makes my heart ache, I understand that everything has changed, that I've crossed a threshold I can never uncross, and tomorrow will bring new challenges, new dangers, new opportunities to prove that I'm strong enough to survive in this world of blood and power, and beautiful monsters who claim you with words and touches and promises that feel like forever. 3 months have passed since the night I walked into Dmitri Volkov's territory and discovered that I had violence sleeping in my bones. 3 months of training with Alessio, in the early morning hours when the world is still dark and quiet, learning how to shoot and fight and move through spaces like I own them. 3 months of working at Inferno, where I've transformed from scared waitress to something sharper and more dangerous, something that makes men think twice before they reach for me without permission, and 3 months of falling deeper into whatever this thing is between Alessio and me. This connection that feels like gravity and madness, and the kind of love that poets write about when they're trying to describe obsession. I stand in front of the mirror in my room, though I've started thinking of it as our room since Alessio spends more nights here than in his own, since the connecting door between our spaces stays open now, like an invitation or a promise or both. And I barely recognize the woman staring back at me, this creature with confident eyes and a body that knows how to hurt people, with expensive clothes that Valentina insists on buying me, and a gun strapped to my thigh under my dress because in this world, beauty and violence are not opposites, but rather two sides of the same coin. The club is thriving. My cover as Alessio's girlfriend-turned-manager so believable that even I sometimes forget it started as a fiction. And the family has accepted me not as some fragile thing that needs protecting, but as someone capable of standing beside their heir, of making decisions that affect their business, of being trusted with secrets that could destroy them if I ever chose to betray that trust. Which I never would because somewhere along the way, this stopped being about survival and started being about belonging, about finding a family in the last place I expected to find one. Valentina has become the mother I lost, filling that hollow space in my chest with her warmth and her wisdom and her absolute certainty that I was always meant to be here, that our meeting in the rain was fate rather than manipulation. And maybe she's right. Maybe I was always destined to share my umbrella with a stranger who would see something in me worth saving, worth claiming, worth transforming into someone who could stand in the darkness without flinching. But tonight is different from the careful routine we've built over these 3 months. Tonight there's tension in the air, like the moment before a storm breaks, and when Alessio comes to collect me for the family dinner that Valentina has insisted on hosting, I can see something in his eyes that makes my pulse race and my stomach flutter with anticipation that has nothing to do with fear, and everything to do with the way he's looking at me like I'm the answer to a question he's been asking his entire life. Dinner is intimate, just the 3 of us in the formal dining room that usually hosts business meetings and strategic planning sessions, and Valentina is practically glowing with satisfaction as she watches Alessio and me together, as she sees the way his hand finds mine under the table, the way our conversations flow like we've known each other for years instead of months, the way we've built something real and solid in the midst of all this violence and darkness. "I have something to tell you both," Valentina says as dessert is being served, and there's something in her voice that makes me pay attention, makes me focus on her words instead of the feeling of Alessio's thumb drawing circles on my wrist, something that I've been keeping to myself because I wanted to see how things developed, wanted to see if my instincts about you, Svetlana, were correct. Alessio tenses beside me, his protective instincts immediately activated by his mother's serious tone, and I find myself squeezing his hand in reassurance even though I have no idea what Valentina is about to reveal, even though my own heart is starting to race with anticipation, or anxiety, or both. "Victor survived his injuries," Valentina says, and the words hit me like a physical blow, like ice water in my veins, because I'd been told he died, been told that the internal bleeding was too severe, been allowed to believe that particular chapter was closed. And 2 weeks ago, he was released from the hospital and immediately disappeared. And our sources tell us that he's planning something, that he's gathering resources and allies, that he intends to come after you, Lana, regardless of the agreement between our families and the Volkovs. The revelation should terrify me, should send me spiraling back into fear and helplessness, but instead I feel something cold and hard settle in my chest, something that feels like determination, like acceptance, like understanding that this was always going to come down to me and Victor, that some debts can only be settled with finality. "Let him come," I say, and my voice is steady and certain, carrying none of the tremor that might have been there 3 months ago. "Let him try to find me. Let him think he can walk into my life again and take what he wants, because the difference between then and now is that I'm not alone anymore. I'm not powerless anymore, and I'm not the girl who freezes when threatened, I'm the woman who fights back, who protects what's hers, who understands that survival in this world requires being willing to do violence before violence is done to you. Alessio makes a sound low in his throat, something between pride and possession. And when he looks at me, I can see everything he feels written plainly on his face. The love and the hunger, and the absolute certainty that I belong to him just as much as he belongs to me. That we've claimed each other in ways that go beyond words or arrangements or strategic alliances. Then we'll be ready, he says, and his voice carries the weight of a vow, a promise that he'll stand beside me when Victor finally makes his move, that together we'll end this threat once and for all. And when he comes, when he tries to hurt you, we'll show him that choosing you as a victim was the worst mistake he ever made, that attacking someone under Marchetti protection means signing your own death warrant in the most permanent way possible. That night, after dinner, after strategic planning sessions about security and contingencies, after Valentina has gone to bed, with a smile that suggests she's pleased with how her machinations have played out, Alessio takes me to the gardens, where the air smells like jasmine, and rain is starting to fall in gentle drops that remind me of that first night, that moment when I chose kindness over convenience and set all of this in motion. He produces an umbrella from somewhere, black and elegant and so different from the cheap dollar store version I'd shared with his mother, and when he opens it over both of us, sheltering us from the rain while pulling me close against his body, I understand that this is his way of acknowledging where we started, of honoring the moment that brought us together. Ready for whatever comes next? He asks, and his voice is soft and intimate in the darkness. Ready to face Victor and any other threat that comes our way. Ready to be my partner in this life, my equal in all things, my wife if you'll have me. Because somewhere between that first night and this moment I fell completely and irrevocably in love with you. And I need you to know that before the next battle begins, before things get dangerous again. The proposal shouldn't surprise me, should feel rushed or strategic or like another arrangement dressed up in romantic language. But instead it feels inevitable. Feels like the only possible conclusion to a story that started with an umbrella, and a stranger, and a kindness that changed everything. Yes, I tell him, and the word feels like a key turning in a lock, like a door opening onto a future I never imagined but now can't imagine living without. Yes to being your wife. Yes to facing whatever darkness comes our way together. Yes to this beautiful, terrifying, perfect life we've built from violence and blood and something that started as protection but became love when neither of us was looking. He kisses, me in the rain, under the umbrella that shelters us from the storm. And I think about the girl I was 3 months ago, scared and powerless, and so desperate for kindness that she shared her umbrella with a stranger without knowing that stranger was anything but random, that she was part of a plan, a test, a carefully orchestrated meeting designed to find someone strong enough to stand beside a monster and call him beautiful. They say the mafia is in his blood, that violence and power and control are woven into his DNA, passed down through generations of men who built empires on blood and bullets. But I've learned that I have darkness in me too, that I'm not the damsel who needs saving, but the queen who stands beside her king and rules with equal parts mercy and menace. And when Victor finally comes for me, and he will come, I know this with absolute certainty, he'll discover that the scared waitress he tried to victimize has been replaced by something far more dangerous, by a woman who learned to fight from the best, who's protected by a family that would burn the city down to keep her safe, and who's discovered that she has her own capacity for violence, her own willingness to do whatever it takes to protect what's hers. I am Svetlana Marchetti now, no longer just the girl who shared her umbrella, but the woman who walked into the storm and emerged transformed. And as the rain falls around us, and Alessio holds me like I'm something precious and deadly in equal measure, I understand that sometimes the greatest acts of kindness are the ones that lead us exactly where we're meant to be, even if the path there is paved with blood and darkness and the kind of love that consumes everything it touches and leaves you grateful to be burned.